Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. And welcome back also to our in-depth look at U.S. pop culture in the year 1978. This time we'll be looking at the second quarter, April, May, and June of the year. There's a lot to get to. We'll talk about movies, television, records, and at the end we'll check in to see what our old friends the Beach Boys are up to during this period. So let's get started with the top 10 albums as the quarter commenced on April 1st, 1978. The top 10 albums were, at number 1, to no one's surprise, Saturday Night Fever, continuing its run as the number 1 album in the country. Number 2 was Eric Clapton's Slow Hand album. At number 3 we had Billy Joel's The Stranger, and at number 4, Even Now by Barry Manilow. At number 5, Steely Dan's Asia album was back on the charts in a big way. This album had been released on September 23, 1977, and had gone to number 3 for 7 weeks beginning October 22nd. It dropped out of the top 10 for a while, then returned to number 5 for 4 weeks beginning on March 18, 78. Despite the album's chart success in the fall of 77, it began producing hit singles early in 78 with Peg. Deacon Blues would follow in May, and Josie in September. Meanwhile, in 78, Black Cow and the title track from the album were also getting plenty of FM radio play. The number 6 spot belonged to George Benson's Weekend in LA with his hit version of On Broadway. At number 7 was Jackson Browne's Runnin' on Empty. Number 8 was Kansas, Point of No Return. Queen's News of the World was at number 9. This was the only album still in the top 10 from the beginning of the year. And rounding out the top 10 was Grand Illusion by Styx. If the Bee Gees and the Robert Stigwood Organization had a lot to be happy about on the album charts as the quarter began, they must have really been delighted with the top 10 singles. Check out how many of the top 10 singles on April 1st, 1978 are Bee Gees related, RSO records, or both. At number 1 we had Night Fever by the Bee Gees. Number 2, Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees. This had been number 1 for 4 weeks beginning on February 4th. At number 3, Lay Down Sally by Eric Clapton at its number 3 peak. Not a Bee Gees record, but an RSO record all the same. Can't Smile Without You by Barry Manilow was at number 4. It would hit number 3 on April 22nd. Emotion by Samantha Sang was at number 5. It had been at number 3 on March 18th. Not an RSO record, but it was written by the Bee Gees. At number 6 was If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman. It would hit number 1 on May 13th. At its number 7 peak was I Go Crazy by Paul Davis. Andy Gibb's Love is Thicker Than Water was at number 8. It had been number 1 on March 4th. Thunder Island by Jay Ferguson, formerly of Spirit and JoJo Gunn, was at its number 9 peak. And Dust in the Wind by Kansas was at number 10. It would hit its number 6 peak the next week, April 8th. That's 5 RSO records and 5 Bee Gees or related singles in the top 10, a total of 7 of the top 10 with a connection to RSO or the Bee Gees. I don't know if this represents the absolute pinnacle of their chart dominance, but it must be pretty close. A lot of singles went in and out of the charts in the second quarter of 1978. Those that did included Jack and Jill by Radio, which went to number 8 on April 15th. We'll Never Have to Say Goodbye Again. Sorry. By England Dan and John Ford Coley, which went to number 9 on April 15th. Our Love by Natalie Cole would hit number 10 on April 15th. The Closer I Get to You by Roberta Flack featuring Donny Hathaway would hit number 5 on April 22nd. Count on Me by Jefferson Starship would hit number 8 on May 13th. Wings with a Little Luck would hit number 1 for 2 weeks beginning on May 20th. Too Much Too Little Too Late by Johnny Mathis and Denise Williams would hit the number 1 spot the week after Wings on June 3rd. Imaginary Lover by the Atlanta Rhythm Section would go to number 7 on June 3rd. And This Time I'm In It for Love by Player would go to number 10 on June 3rd. You're the one that I want by John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John would hit the number 1 spot the week after Johnny Mathis and Denise Williams on June 10th. Another RSO record. Feel So Good by Chuck Mangione would hit number 4 on June 10th, and George Benson's version of On Broadway would hit number 7 on June 10th. I always wondered if Player bemoaned the timing of their success. They began making hits for RSO records right as Saturday Night Fever took off. Eric Clapton had a big hit with Slow Hand. Andy Gibb became a sensation, and Grease was right around the corner. In another year, I'm sure the label would have been overjoyed at 2 top 10 hits, one of which, Baby Come Back, was a #1. Under the circumstances, I wonder if RSO was too busy minting coin elsewhere to even notice Player's success. Turning to movies, at the Academy Awards ceremony on April 3rd, Woody Allen's Annie Hall was the surprise winner for the Best Picture of 1977. Woody Allen also won Best Director and Best Screenplay, and made the news by skipping the ceremony and instead keeping a standing Monday night date to play clarinet with an amateur jazz band at a pub in New York. New movie releases in April included Louis Malle's controversial film Pretty Baby, which made a celebrity out of Brooke Shields, and Martin Scorsese's The Last Waltz, a film of the all-star farewell concert from the band. May 10th brought The End, a comedy starring Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, and Sally Field. And May 18th saw the release of The Buddy Holly Story, starring Gary Busey in the title role. The film was not particularly accurate, but did raise awareness of Buddy Holly's music. The summer movie season got underway in earnest on June 16th with the release of 2 major blockbusters. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, came Jaws 2. And just when you thought it was safe to go back to the 50s, came Grease, the biggest movie of the year, starring Olivia Newton-John, and coming off his star-making role in Saturday Night Fever, John Travolta. We'll talk more about Grease later on. As for Jaws 2, it was clearly designed to replicate the success of the original 3 summers earlier. While it wasn't nearly as bad as the series would eventually become, the scene where the shark is tricked into biting a high voltage line, then bursts into flames and burns like an oil tanker, hinted at worse things to come. I never realized sharks were so highly combustible. June 28th saw the release of Heaven Can Wait, starring Warren Beatty, and Convoy, an action comedy from Sam Peckinpah starring Chris Christopherson and Ally McGraw, based on the 1975 C.W. McCall hit record of the same name. On television, the April 22nd episode of Saturday Night Live turned out to be a real time capsule of early 1978 pop culture. The show opened with Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi in their first official appearance as the Blues Brothers, performing Hey Bartender. Steve Martin, guest hosting for the 5th time, appeared as Theodoric of York, medieval barber, did a dance routine with Gilda Radner, and with Dan Aykroyd, reprised the Czechoslovakian Festrunk brothers, Jorge and Yortuk. Weekend Update included one of Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd's point-counterpoint segments. Later in the show, Lisa Lukener and Todd, the Nerds, go to the science fair, and Steve Martin premiered his new single, King Tut. If Steve Martin's career had been red hot before, this night's performance seemed to launch it into the stratosphere. 4 days later, on April 26th, NBC broadcast the Ringo television special, a Prince and the Pauper story starring Ringo's star and a very odd assortment of guests, including Art Carney, Angie Dickinson, Mike Douglas, Carrie Fisher, Vincent Price, and John Ritter. For Beatle fans, it did also offer a cameo appearance by George Harrison. It was George's second cameo TV appearance in a month after the Ruddle special, and he sported what was undoubtedly the most uncomfortable looking of all his many hairstyles. The special was done largely to promote Ringo's newly released Bad Boy album, which was almost a companion piece to Ringo the Fourth, which had been released the prior fall. Both albums, unfortunately, are indistinct, almost anonymous, with little of the charm of Ringo's earlier work. In any case, the special didn't seem to help much. Bad Boy reached 129 on the chart. More successful album releases from April of 1978 included the Grease soundtrack. As a senior in high school at the time, this is something I never would have bought. And I never would have gone and seen the movie either, except maybe on a date, which sadly for me in 1978 was really not that much of an issue. I do have to admit the songs are very catchy, and I've got a certain nostalgic fondness for Grease now, so much so that a while back I actually bought a set of the Grease bubblegum trading cards. I'll go through this very quickly here. It's nerdy, but, well, I guess a lot of this is nerdy. There you go. And there were some stickers on top of the cards. God, there's a lot of cards. I didn't remember there were that many. There's some stickers, and here are the actual packs that the bubblegum cards came in. At the time, not much a fan of Grease, but now it's kind of grown on me. Other albums released in April of 1978 that rated highly on the chart included Showdown by the Isley Brothers, You Light Up My Life by Johnny Mathis, the FM soundtrack, a collection of mostly recently released rock music featuring Steely Dan's title track FM, No Static at All, and Carly Simon's Boys in the Trees album. May brought the release of Bob Seger's A Stranger in Town, and Joe Walsh's But Seriously Folks. The single from the album, Life's Been Good, would be a number 12 hit and a staple of FM radio play during the summer of '78. The album also showcased Joe Walsh's continuing predilection for using a comically mundane phrase as a title and juxtaposing it with a comically overdramatic cover photo. Also released in May was So Full of Love by the O'Jays, the Thank God It's Friday soundtrack album with its title track by Love and Kisses, which would go to number 22 on the chart and number 1 on Billboard's disco chart, and Donna Summer's Last Dance, which would eventually hit number 3. At the beginning of June, we got Life is a Song Worth Singing by Teddy Pendergrass. Also in early June came Bruce Springsteen's long-awaited Darkness on the Edge of Town, Octave by the Moody Blues, and Some Girls by the Rolling Stones, with a disco track like Miss You and punk-inspired tracks like When the Whip Comes Down and Respectable. You got the feeling that the Rolling Stones were once again following trends rather than setting them, but the quality of the work was good enough that nobody really seemed to care. Additionally, as the Stones undoubtedly expected, they were quickly threatened with legal action for unauthorized use of likenesses by the likes of Lucille Ball, Farrah Fawcett, and Raquel Welch, and quickly changed this inner sleeve with a punk-inspired paste-over of all the non-Rolling Stone images. Not only did this get the album some additional press, it also made people eager to buy up these first editions as they were something of a collectible. The Rolling Stones started their 1978 U.S. tour the next day, which became the big concert event of the summer. Also released in June was Andy Gibb's Shadow Dancing album, which came with a flyer offering a chance to buy Dreamy merchandise such as t-shirts, tote bags, and of course to join the Andy Gibb fan club. Bob Dylan's Street Legal was released. This did not have a flyer for any Dreamy merchandise. Also released in June was Double Vision by Foreigner, Worlds Away by Pablo Cruz, and Sounds and Stuff Like That by Quincy Jones. Another notable album from the spring of 1978 was Meat Loaf's Bat Out of Hell. Though this had been released in October of 1977, it wasn't much noticed until Meat Loaf's appearance on Saturday Night Live on March 28, 1978. After that, it began to get radio play. The single, 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad, entered the top 40 on April 29th and peaked at number 11 on July 8th. The album went to number 14 early in the summer. 2 further singles both broke just into the top 40, both peaking at number 39 in the fall of 1978 and the winter of 1979. And what about the Beach Boys in the spring of 1978? As we discussed last time, they went through a fraught, tense, and unhappy tour of Australia and New Zealand in February and March of the year. Nevertheless, by April 14th, they were back out on the road and continued touring in the US and Canada for much of April, May, and June. On May 8th, we got the release of the Almost Summer soundtrack featuring Mike Love's group Celebration. The single, Almost Summer, was released on April 3rd and credited to Celebration featuring Mike Love. The single was written by Brian, Mike, and Al and peaked at a pretty respectable number 28 on June 24th. The soundtrack was on MCA. The Beach Boys, of course, were now under contract to CBS. I suspect if the single had been credited to the Beach Boys, they might have had a major hit on their hands in the summer of 1978. On April 28th, Celebration made their live debut at USC with special guests Brian, Carl, and Jan and Dean, who were making personal appearances again in the wake of the popularity of their biopic, Dead Man's Curve, which had aired on February 3rd. Elsewhere, Dennis resumed work on his second solo album, Bamboo. That'll do it for the second quarter of 1978. Hope you enjoyed this. Love to hear your comments. Please hit the like and subscribe if you don't mind. And we will see you next time when we'll talk about the third quarter of '78. After that, we will talk about the MIU album, and then we'll wind up with the fourth quarter of 1978. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Bye.